Bonjour tout le monde.
Hello, everybody. I grew up myself in Pondicherry, a former French colony in the south of India. As a child, I saw that resources were scarce around there because the climate was very dry and water distribution, therefore, was fairly rationed in my town. Water was available only a few hours a day. I took a shower a few times a week just using a bucket of water. And I also remember that we never threw away anything. We always found some clever way of extending its service life. That was for everyday products. We made them live longer. People who sold shoes didn't just sell them, but they also repaired them. I also learned that it was possible to convert waste into something useful. Close to home, there was a man who collected old magazines and books in the English language, and he rented them to me for a few cents. So I was able to devour them and learn the English language in a fairly frugal way. Didn't cost me much. So after spending my first 20 years in the Southern Hemisphere like that, contending with scarce resources, I came up into the Northern Hemisphere because I was attracted by this promise of abundance. I did IT studies here in France. Then I went over to the United States and started to work in Silicon Valley. For several years as a consultant with large Western corporations, I helped them to become more innovative. In the Western world, we tend to associate progress and innovation with more. It's always more. You create, you purchase products that are more and more sophisticated, technologically speaking. Look at iPhone 5, 6, maybe 7 shortly, 8, why not? Since the Industrial Revolution in the Western world, we've been believing that if we want to do more, it means we will be doing better. If we do more, we'll be doing better. That's our paradigm. But now we know that the resources that are necessary, especially natural resources, are actually scarcer and scarcer these days. So 10 years ago, I came to the awakening that we're going to have to radically reinvent the way in which we innovate in the Western world. Instead of doing more with more, we've got to learn how to do more with less. My own personal experience taught me that this model for innovation that would use resources more efficiently actually already exists in the Southern Hemisphere, where people live with less. That's par for the course. That's normal living down there. So I decided to go back to my roots, back to basics, and I started studying how developing regions like India, China, Africa, or South America were capable of developing in spite of a huge scarcity of resources in terms of capital, infrastructures, energy, or water, how they managed to actually get by and develop nonetheless. So I discovered that the entrepreneurs and the companies in the emerging countries had a rather unique mindset. They looked at the resource constraints not as being a showstopper or a roadblock, but as being an opportunity to innovate and create economic value and social value for their communities. Take the example of Kelvin Doe. He's a teenager from Sierra Leone. He went and scavenged materials out of people's garbage cans to build a generator to supply a whole village with electricity. And then he built his own radio station. It's still working these days. Kelvin has demonstrated that it's possible to recover resources and create things new using waste. Let's go to Peru next. There's an engineering school in Lima that invented a huge advertising hoarding. The surface of it absorbs the humidity in the air and condenses it in a water purifier that produces more than 90 liters of drinking water per day. Here you see it. So this ability to create more value by using fewer resources, it's something I've called myself frugal innovation. Frugal innovation is a breakthrough strategy for two reasons. Firstly, it creates more value for all of the stakeholders, that is, the shareholders, of course, but also consumers and society at large. The second reason is that it seeks to reduce not only financial resources, but also natural resources, and especially time, which is the scarcest resource around and the most valuable resource. And it's by doing these two things, fewer resources and more value, that we will succeed in the resource revolution. This revolution is already well underway in the emerging world, but is now expanding to encompass the mature economies as well. The question is, how can a company come on board, come into this revolution and avail of this revolution? And as I've done research into several pioneering companies that have already espoused this resource revolution in the past, I'd like to share with you 4 key principles that show that you can use the idea of doing more and doing better with less. The first principle consists of reducing the distance between supply and demand. We produce goods these days that are sent over thousands of kilometers towards the consumers who will use these goods. So there's a geographical distance, it's consuming energy, and it's generating a lot of waste. Now, just imagine that we could shorten that distance and produce more locally, closer to where the demand lies. Produce products locally in smaller quantities and use much fewer resources in so doing. Thanks to 3D printers that are becoming more widely available and fab labs and tech shops opening up in all towns and cities, you can make your own goods in your own district. So if you can manufacture locally, you can start thinking of making your own medication. Why not? Novartis is currently testing out a new manufacturing principle called continuous production, co-developed with the MIT. It's taking place in a micro plant that can manufacture medication 10 times faster and 50% cheaper, whilst reducing the carbon emissions by 90%. It's unbelievable. Another way of reducing carbon emissions is to recover waste. That's the second principle for frugal innovation. Instead of recycling your waste in a closed circuit, in a closed loop, try and creatively reuse it so as to offer more and more value to more and more individuals, opening the pathway to what I call the spiral economy. I'd like to give you a couple of examples to show you how it's possible to increase the value of waste in an exponential way. Take the example of Schools for Future. This is a company that encourages the 65 million inhabitants of the shanty towns in India to collect plastic waste that they find in the streets and use this waste to pay for the education of their children. The company purchases, recycles, and resells the waste and uses the money generated so as to set up schools in the shanty towns. Over and above the visible waste, there are also other kinds of waste that are invisible that we try to get rid of too, that can have a lot of value nonetheless. What about the heat generated by millions of servers and data centers? Instead of reusing that heat, we try to dissipate it by cooling the data centers. That requires even more energy, doesn't it? So it's absurd. So Paul Benoit, who's a Polytechnique graduate, he launched Carnot Computing, which is a startup company which manufactures digital radiators that use the heat produced by the microprocessors inside so as to heat homes and offices. It's really very ingenious, isn't it? And there are several proofs of this kind of thing all around the world. That's the third principle I'd like to talk about in terms of frugal innovation. The idea is to use abundance to overcome scarcity. Instead of reinventing the wheel, use the resources you already have to meet your needs. Take the case of Africa, for example. 80% of Africans don't have a bank account, but 80% of Africans don't have access to electricity either. However, 80% of Africans do have a mobile phone. So in Africa, you find several innovative solutions available, availing of the possibilities offered by mobile connectivity, so as to overcome the lack of basic services like bank accounts or energy. In Kenya, there is the M-Pesa mobile service that enables individuals to send or receive money via their mobile phone without having a bank account. And they now use their mobile phones to pay for services such as solar energy, solar power, on the basis of their actual daily consumption. This ability and this principle that consists of overcoming scarcity by using an abundant resource like connectivity and data, that can also be useful in other areas such as agriculture. My neighbor in Silicon Valley launched a startup company called G-Thrive using wireless sensors to collect detailed data on the soil conditions and then helping farmers so as to consume less energy and water, to help them to consume less energy and water whilst at the same time increasing their production, their output, and the quality of their products. So I've just touched on the three key principles of frugal innovation. We can all implement them. But in order to really make a go of frugal innovation, you've got to adopt a fourth principle, which is the principle of building up collaborative networks. The share economy, the collaborative economy, is mainly made up of consumers these days, exchanging and sharing data and also products and services among themselves. But what would happen if companies started to set up collaborative networks so as to enable them to share their assets and their resources? It may seem to be rather radical, but that's what's starting to happen. In Denmark, there are companies in the eco-industrial estate in Kalundborg that exchange their production waste and share energy and information just like a collaborative ecosystem. By integrating their value chains like symbiosis in a way, these companies have massively reduced their carbon emissions and their water consumption. If this is possible on the scale of an industrial estate, can you imagine the huge, massive impact it could have on the scale of a region or a country? If multinationals decided to share their assets and resources in collaborative networks. I've just expounded on the four main principles of frugal innovation that will enable all companies to do more and better with less. And I do believe quite sincerely that if all companies adopted these principles, we could together create a frugal economy, which would have as a driver human energy, because human energy is the most abundant resource in the world. In Indian philosophy, each human being has a certain amount of energy centers called chakras. And if you activate these chakras, you can awaken your creativity and passion and find some meaning for your life. In order to create a real revolution of resources, I would like us to transcend this artificial division between the North and the South. And let's connect up individuals from all over the world so as to utilize our collective intelligence and our passion so as to co-create a global economy which in the future will be frugal, inclusive and sustainable. Thank you for your attention.